Today we're going to talk about why tautology is always valid. Always. It's always true. And reduction of something to invalidity because it isn't necessarily empirical or reflecting of objective reality doesn't really matter, because that's only when something true about objective or empirical reality isn't predicated in the analytic statement. So an analytic statement or a tautology, well, let's define both of these. They're basically the same thing. They're functionally very, very similar. An analytic statement is something that is true by virtue of the definition of the terms involved. So the famous example is all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, Socrates is mortal. It's analytic because it's the terms involved are defined and they kind of verify the end conclusion by virtue of the definitions. A tautology is the opposite of a contradiction. Although, you know, it's kind of funny. I see sometimes tautology is defined as needless repetition. I've seen it defined as that. Kind of forget exactly where, but it seems like a weird jab. But anyways, it's the opposite of a contradiction, which means it's something that is always true, which is basically probably going to be by virtue of the definition involved of what is, you know, determined to be absolutely true, always true. Whereas a contradiction is something that can be never true, or can never be true. Something that is always inconsistent, whereas a tautology is something that's always consistent. Most likely, I mean, I couldn't think of any other reason other than it being a analytic statement, which is something that's true by the definitions of the terms involved. So a criticism that might be levied against the validity of analytic statements insofar as something like metaphysics or just philosophy generally is involved or concerned is that analytic statements don't necessarily reflect objective empirical reality, which is true. But this is only the case insofar as there is nothing predicated about objective empirical reality in the analytic statement. So for instance, let's say you have a flying horse, and then you say, basically your conclusion, let's just make this very simple and circular. You could make it sound like a more official analytic statement or tautology if you wanted to. I don't really care to do that right now. So Jasmine is a horse that can fly. Jasmine is a flying horse. That doesn't necessarily reflect reality, because horses don't fly generally, ever. But there's nothing about objective empirical reality predicated in the statement about Jasmine the flying horse being a flying horse. There's nothing trying to shoehorn it into the context of reality, so, or objective empirical reality, because it's still true. In the context of what is predicated, it is true. Obviously, it's logically true, and that much is generally admitted. But as soon as reality is predicated, like, let's say, Jasmine is a real-life flying horse. Jasmine is a flying horse in objective empirical reality. Well, that's obviously inconsistent because the definition isn't true. It's just reduced to x equals x. But that's just an example to kind of demonstrate the idea here. You could argue that that it's still true because even though I'm making a predicate about objective empirical reality, ultimately they're just words, but I think that's kind of just nonsensical. The point is that as soon as objective empirical reality is predicated in the analytic statement, such as with a system like the CTMU, which Chris Langen terms a super tautology, because of the way it's constructed, it's supposed to be the case that no matter what, everything predicated is always true. And of course, these predicates extend to the whole of reality. That's the entire point. So really, in order to debunk something like the CTMU, you can't simply reduce the validity of logic, because tautologies and analytic statements are always true in the context of what's predicated. So if there's predicates about empirical reality, or that are claimed to extend thereto, in order to debunk it, you have to actually debunk what's predicated and show that it's inconsistent. But the thing is, as soon as you do that, it's no longer tautologically true. It's no longer an analytic statement, because it's no longer true by definition of the terms involved, because you've shown that whatever is predicated is inconsistent with those definitions. So it's no longer true by virtue of that. And that's the only way you can really debunk that. Because even when it doesn't reflect objective empirical reality, an analytic or tautological statement is true in the context of whatever it's talking about. And you really can't get around that. And these things are, honestly, tautology and analytic statements, and trying to form them such that they are applicable to, you know, reality in the sense that most people think of the word, is a very useful tool, because it's kind of, if it, you know, logic kind of dictates that there is going to be things that you can say for certain about reality, and these things will be what reality verifies, kind of like self-verifies. It is almost like circular reasoning, but it obviously not quite, because it doesn't assume itself to be true. It confirms itself to be true. And you'd think if reality on any level isn't just totally ineffable, that has to be true on some level. And as Arval, a YouTube channel on here, said, and I really agree with this, that in order to really engage in dialectic with anyone, there's one kind of precept that should be mutually acknowledged, which is that you can determine truth in reality, that you can come to an understanding. Because if you can't agree on that, then honestly, there's really no reason you should be talking with